Welcome back to another episode of the HSE Network podcast. In a new setting while we're in between podcast studios at the moment. This week we're joined by Kate Field of the BSI group. Kate's going to be giving a talk on the new workplace wellbeing model that's been introduced by BSI. It takes a lot of inspiration from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it really moves on and puts it in a modern workplace context. Thanks for coming on the show, Kate. Last week, we mainly discussed ISO 45003 and what that means for health and safety. This week, we're going to be looking at the new wellbeing model that BSI has introduced. Can we start by maybe looking at some of the pitfalls that employers fall into when it comes to wellbeing practices in the workplace?
Yeah, certainly. And thank you for inviting me back. I think there are a number of sort of challenges and areas where organisations fall foul with their wellbeing programs. I think the first and most important is that they are used as a sticking plaster over much deeper wounds, particularly related to trust. You know, what quite often happens with the development of wellbeing programs within organizations is they do a worker survey, an employee survey, and it comes back and it might not all be happy and joyous. And therefore the organization thinks, oh, we've got to do something because we've got unhappy workers. And they create a set of initiatives, you know, just short-term plasters to deal with an immediate reaction rather than really delving into what the underlying issues are. And that's when you get things like I like to call it the yogurt and yoga initiatives. You know, there's a need for the organization to react and say that they're doing something to look after their people, but the organization looks for quick fixes. And this is why there's a really strong relationship with, you know, occupational health and safety risk management, psychological health and safety risk management, because that's about identifying what are the root causes of the problems and dealing with them. So that's kind of the high level challenge. And I think the other thing that creates issues for organization is when they do develop their well-being programs, they don't define well-being. And therefore it creates a whole set of uh, uh, expectations by the workforce, because everybody has a different definition of well-being, and it means different things to different people. So where organizations fail to actually define it, they're almost straight away setting themselves up to fail, because you know, there's going to be a mismatch between maybe what, you know, certain groups of workers think well-being programs will be and what those well-being programs actually are. So that's the other challenge. And I think then the other thing that we see is that, you know, organizations invest in these programs. And I'm not saying that they're not doing really good things, but you know, you asked me what some of the challenges and pitfalls are, and this is sort of my observation. But because they approach it as a set of initiatives rather than a long-term sort of cultural change program, again, they always have limited success. So if you look at kind of a maturity of wellbeing programs, you see a really kind of clear journey. So, you know, you have this worker survey saying maybe things aren't all great, and then they introduce well-being, whatever that happens to be for that organization. You see employee engagement scores start to go up, which is great. It's fantastic because you know, there is something going on to look after the workforce. But because they're not long term and they're not addressing the root cause, again, after a period of time, it comes down. And we're starting to see evidence of this across a lot of wellbeing programs where research is going on, where actually, you know, it had this positive impact to begin with, but after 2 or 3 years, it loses momentum and it loses the impact. So I think, you know, the key thing for organizations to think about is creating wellbeing programs that address multiple aspects, which are clearly defined and are about changing the culture of the organization rather than a set of initiatives.
I think I heard it coined, not the yogurt and yoga approach, but the banana and bites approach once. And it feeds into exactly what you said, that it needs to be, if you're not addressing the root causes, perhaps if the work that they're doing is inherently stressful, having a cycle to work scheme isn't really going to tackle it. So I guess moving on, can you give a overview of the model that BSI has introduced?
Yeah, certainly. So I think one of the things that I've seen over the years as I've been looking at this is organizations again don't think holistically about their well-being programs. You know, they'll do a bit on physical health. There might be some spattering around mental health. You know, there might be some sort of coaching and mentoring, but it's never looked at holistically. And coming back to the point I made about definition, so 45,003 actually has given us a definition of workplace wellbeing, which is hugely important, our first fully international definition. And it describes it as the fulfillment of the physical, mental, social, and cognitive needs and expectations of a worker related to their work. And I think, you know, a key word in this is fulfillment. So what do you need to create within your organization to give that sense of fulfillment for individuals? And there are a number of layers and approaches that are needed to create that fulfillment that is meeting the mental and physical and social and cognitive needs. And also, you know, that fulfillment is about unlocking people's potential, and creating the best environment for them to fulfill their potential. So the BSI best practice model on workplace wellbeing is designed really to give all of the building blocks that are needed to create that fulfillment. And it's adapted and used from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because, you know, it's not necessarily a popular and with everyone, but the principle that you need basic needs addressed before you can then build on that to create those higher level needs, I think is absolutely right. And if we look at the context of workplace well-being, you know, unless you're keeping people physically safe, then, you know, then they're going to be worried about it being hurt as a basic need, you know, and they're going to care less about what their options are for career development if they're worried about not going home at the end of the day. So that principle of using sort of Maslow's hierarchy, that you need some foundations and then build on it, is the principle behind the model. But the other thing the model has done is it has looked at, you know, a range of existing models and reports that have looked at, you know, what does good work look like? You know, how do we create decent work? If we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, what are the criteria that we know and is evidence-based? And it brings all of those things together, and it creates a model, a framework that has 3 layers, if you like. So starting with basic needs, and then looking at what the psychological needs are, and then what the higher level fulfillment needs are. And then there are 16 elements that make up that total model, and it starts, you know, with those basic needs. So it provides this framework. And I think the key thing, and I'll go through some of the individual elements to bring it to life, is that the model is designed to achieve significant cultural change. It is not a set of initiatives for an organization to tick some boxes. It's about a fundamental restructuring of an organization's DNA to create that trust, to deliver that fulfillment. And the other thing the model does is then highlight the benefits for the organization. I think, you know, that sometimes with wellbeing programs, we always focus on the individual. And actually this is about the organization and what the organization is doing, and therefore the benefits for the organization. So the implementation of this model actually shows what those benefits are at each level. So at a basic needs, it's about having decent, safe, healthy and compliant workplaces. At psychological needs, it's about having an engaged, committed and productive workforce. For fulfillment needs, it's about creating the environment that you need for innovation. And then what that whole model then brings to the organization is resilience, which is so hugely important in this day and age.
And making the organizational benefits clear is going to help you get buy-in from the top, which is so essential when it comes to enacting big cultural changes like this. You mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I must admit, it did crop up one or two times when you were explaining it. Can you maybe expand a bit more onto the different types of areas that are incorporated into the new BSI model, and how maybe it is I want to say improvement, but maybe a moving on from Maslow's hierarchy?
Yeah, so I think the thing that it does is look at everything a worker needs within their working life and their working career to fulfill their potential. I mean, Maslow's hierarchy was obviously about looking at individual potential, but this is within the context of the workplace and what's needed. So do you want me to sort of take it through, kind of give you an overview of each of the levels and what's included and why they're important?
Yeah, I think that'd be a good place for the listeners.
Okay, so at basic needs, it's about the physiological aspects, so the really basic things. So things like workplace welfare. Again, it's an area that's often forgotten, but if there aren't sufficient toilets that are located close enough to the work, then actually, if people are worried about not having time to go to the toilet or have a toilet break, then that's a really basic physical need that creates issues if organizations can't do that. The same, it covers things like access to water, changing facilities, thermal comfort within a workplace, lighting conditions, all of those kind of basic physical needs. Then it moves on and looks at what we need in terms of rest and recuperation. So there's a link here in terms of obviously working hours, but understanding, what good looks like in terms of shift patterns, ensuring that people are having that ability to have the rest and recuperation between their working cycles. So again, really basic levels, which a lot of organizations follow sort of legal processes. There are working hours legislation, for instance, and they're important. But for some organizations around the world, there aren't those legal frameworks. So this is about identifying what that needs to look like. Then there's a piece on personal health, and this is the bit which is perhaps most related to a lot of traditional workplace wellbeing programs. This is about focusing on those aspects of personal health that will have the biggest impacts on people's long-term health and morbidity. So things like, smoking cessation programs, nutritional information to help people with their weight, encouraging physical exercise. But in here as well is where mental health awareness programs come in and starting to break down, a lot of the stigma that is associated with mental ill health and increasing awareness to break down some of the barriers. So that kind of, so a lot of the traditional well-being comes at this really basic level. But it also includes absence management and rehabilitation. So again, a recognition that, people do become physically or mentally unwell, either through work or out, for non-work related causes, but having processes to help them either, stay in work or return to work quickly are really important as a basic needs. So this is your fundamental foundation level. And then we move up into what we might think of as some of the traditional health and safety areas. So again, we're still in basic needs, but this is focused on safety. And this is where sort of compliance for the organization starts to come in. So again, it has three areas. It has say traditional health and safety, so creating a workplace that is free from physical, mental and cognitive injury and ill health. So mental and cognitive is really important. So this is where, using something like ISO 45003, which we discussed last time, becomes so important. It also is the area where we are looking to ensure that we have a workplace free from adverse social behaviour, so bullying, harassment, discrimination. And obviously there's an overlap there with health and safety and psychological health and safety, but it's designed to be much more encompassing, and bring in maybe some of the aspects that are traditionally seen in sort of employment law or contractual law about, what are acceptable behaviours? What does that look like? How do you enforce that? And it's about creating, again, starting to address fundamental cultural issues within the organisation. And then the last area in this level of the model is about creating secure and sustainable employability. So the secure addresses the fact that, as a basic need, we need financial security. We need to know that our job is secure. We need to know that there's going to be a regular income. So this challenges some of the issues that we see around gig economy or 0 hours contract, all of those sorts of things. And we know that, again, linking back to psychological health and safety, if people feel that they've got job insecurity, then that can be a cause of psychological ill health. And then the sustainable employability is something that's maybe new to our listeners. So this is really focusing on creating the right framework for the whole life cycle of somebody's career. We know that we've got an aging workforce, and therefore, what we need to do to ensure that people can stay in work and be productive needs to be thought about in a way that it hasn't been historically. So sustainable employability is about creating everything you need for the entire life cycle of somebody's career, with a particular focus about what it is you need to do to keep them healthy and upskilled, keep their capability as they come towards the latter part of their career. So it's a really important aspect that some organisations are starting to look at, but maybe some haven't yet. So it's a really interesting one, and very important. So they were our basic needs. So our foundations, without which, quite frankly, if it's not there, we're not going to get very far. And that's probably a good point to just mention to our listeners that although I'm describing this in almost a linear way, and obviously it's kind of designed as this hierarchy, organizations don't need to start at the bottom and work to the top. They can do bits all the way through. The key is that if you haven't got those foundations right, then anything you do above is likely to be weak, and potentially the whole thing will come crumbling down. So it's probably worth making that point now. So then we move up into our middle level, which is really important in terms of developing psychological needs. And again, it's broken into sort of two sub areas. So the first one is around belonging. And this is where you're starting to really look at the culture of the organisation to create that engaged, committed and productive workforce. So really important part of creating that belonging is by having really effective consultation and participation of the workforce in all aspects of their work. Again, this is something that we see in health and safety, in particular, either legislative requirements or ISO 45001 will talk about it. But it's about thinking about it much more widely, and creating those relationships. And then from that sort of consultation and participation, you build those collaborative and positive working relationships. So this is a good example about how there's an interaction between different levels of the model. So the level before we talked about preventing adverse social behaviour, so bullying, harassment. So here's our higher level, which is about creating positive relationships relationships. So they do interact. And we know that, I think we've all had experience of it. If you go to work and you feel you've got good relationships with your colleagues and your line manager, you are more productive, you are more engaged, it's a happier place to be. If there are negative relationships, then that creates issues. So it's really addressing some of those things. This is also where work-life balance comes in. So again, a relationship with rest and recuperation on the level below. But this is much more a recognition that, people are more than just workers. They have family, they have friends, and you need to ensure that there's an awareness of that, and you're creating the space and the time for people to be their whole person. So there are elements here, of course, in terms of working hours, and creating flexible working patterns, again, which comes through in terms of, this is why it sits in psychological, because psychological health and safety comes in there. And then the last element here again is that reflection that we are more than just workers. We are wives, brothers, sisters, fathers, carers, friends, support network, volunteers, whatever it happens to be. So creating creating an environment where people can have that social engagement. So this is what this is about. Social engagement is really important. And this is where, again, some existing wellbeing initiatives will come in, because this would incorporate things like volunteering programs or community engagement. So, again, there's a lot of what organisations will be doing which will fit in this model, but they're not necessarily thinking about it in a holistic way. So then next, we come into, still in psychological needs, but we have fair and respectful workplaces. So again, this is also related to our relationship. I should do it the other way if it's here now, relationships, and also, preventing adverse social behaviour. But this is much more focused on, I suppose, what might be easily described about very inclusive programs. So this is really about addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in a very robust way. I think one of the things that we've seen historically is that as organisations look at EDI initiatives, again, they're done as a set of initiatives, and they're done to accommodate the other, whatever the other might happen to be within the context of the organisation, rather than completely deconstructing the organizational processes, the organizational DNA, and recreating it as a fully inclusive organization, rather than this kind of tag on, or we've got to create opportunities for women or ethnic groups. It's actually about completely deconstructing the organization and redeveloping it. So this again is maybe an example of where organizations have historically thought about these things as separate pockets. So we'll have health and safety, we might have some career development, and we might have some diversity and inclusion programs, all of which have good things, but they're all done in isolation, and therefore they all limit their impact. So this model again is about bringing these things back together and thinking about them holistically. We also have effort and reward balance here. So again, relates to financial security, but this is much more than just about how much we're paid. This is about our ability to have recognition for good work, simple things like actually saying thank you for a job well done, or well done, that was a good job, as well as then looking at those wider opportunities for recognition in terms of this is where there's an aspect of financial, because it might be related to bonus, but it might also be linked to the next area, which is career development. So if you're doing a good job, how does the organization recognize that in terms of your career development opportunities? So again, a sort of career development is an area that is perhaps most strongly related to some of the traditional approaches of sort of Maslow, because one of the things that we know for human beings generally is to get this sense of fulfillment, we want the ability to develop, whatever that looks like for us as an individual. So career development is really important, and having different options, you know, either at the same level or moving up career or changing career, whatever it happens to be. And again, this relates back to sustainable employability, because we also know that lifelong learning is a really positive thing for our physical and our mental and our cognitive health. So again, sort of showing that relationship. And then the last part of this model is perhaps the most overlooked aspect of prioritizing people. And this is what this model is called. Actually, I think we haven't mentioned that, the prioritizing people model. And autonomy is the area. And the reason I think it's most often overlooked is because trust is at the heart of it. And we touched on this during, I think, our last discussion on 45,003. You know, during the pandemic, we've uncovered this slightly uncomfortable truth that, you know, one of the reasons not one of the reasons, the reason why organizations really didn't adopt flexible working and encourage home working was because they didn't trust their people. And therefore they weren't willing to give them the autonomy that is needed. And this is a really important part of this sense of fulfillment, our ability to manage our own workloads, our own deadlines, and, you know, the autonomy that comes with deciding, you know, where to work. And I think, you know, one of the key things with autonomy is it does unlock this discretionary effort, which is really positive for the organization. This is the bit that keeps all of this, but this is the bit that really helps in terms of productivity, because people will be willing to go that a little bit extra for organizations. So if you've got all of those elements in place, then you get to the top level, which is actualization. This is where individuals feel fulfilled, and what you get as an organization is the benefits that come from innovation. So when individuals have got career development and autonomy, and they feel safe and secure and they feel positive, what that unlocks is creativity. And out of creativity comes innovation. So at this level, these two are very closely linked together. And, you know, we know that another key aspect of innovation is having a diverse workforce. So the more diverse your workforce is, the better that creativity and that better that innovation. So coming back to fair and respectful workplaces, which is about your EDI policies, then again, it becomes essential for this next level, because the more diverse your workforce is, the more innovative it is. And if organizations get all of those right, then you create two things. You create the fulfillment for the individual, so the well-being for the individual, and then the organizational resilience for long-term sustainability of the organization.
I think you've given a fantastic roundup of the model there, Kate. Where can people go to learn more about the new BSI model?
So there's a full white paper that sets the context. It talks about what's been going on. It touches on what I've mentioned about trust and why it hasn't been there, and some of the wider challenges. And then it explains the context of the model and goes through each of those elements in more detail. And you can find that white paper on the BSI website. If you search BSI prioritizing people, then all being well, it will be the top of your Google search, and then you can click through and download a copy of the white paper. And of course, people are more than welcome to contact me directly.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.